promised you some mobility insights, and today we have a primary leg session, and I just want to take you through my mobility warm-up. And the first exercise that I start with is an exercise that we use to open up the posterior hip capsule of my left side, and therefore we use a bit of this elevation here, small staggered stance, and we go heavy on that leg where we want to stretch out that hip capsule. And then what we're going to do is we are going into a stacked position, at least I try, and then I want to hinge over that left hip in order to open up some space for that posterior hip capsule. And it looks like that. And what I do is I inhale through the nose, and with each exhale I try to go a bit deeper into the stretch. And we don't do it for a particular amount of time. We measure it in breathing cycles, and I just go with like around 10 breathing cycles and 2 sets. Now, on the right side, we do it a bit differently, and we try to work a bit more on the front hip capsule. As you saw on my squat, there is a bit of a hip hike where the left side hikes a bit up. So on the left side, we want to open up a bit more the back side. On the right side, we want to open up a bit more the front side, so that I learn, or not learn, but be able to sit also a bit more into my right hip in order to avoid that shift. So what we do for is basically a bit of a variation of the famous pigeon, but instead of sitting back with the hips, we bring our upper body down. So we start in that quad-rupted stance. I go into internal rotation with my right hip, and now I don't sit back like that, but I rather keep position. I try to stay on the stack, and then I go down like that. Okay, next drill is going to be an tibial internal rotation drill. Sounds fancy. Basically what we do is we just force that lower leg a bit into internal rotation in a passive position, so it cannot move into any type of compensation, just to work and condition that position. Therefore, use a foam roller, put my tibia on the foam roller, I'll lock my foot in position, and then you can already see it forces my lower leg into that internal rotated position. And now I just hinge into that position. And the last exercise, just a stacking exercise in order to pre-activate the stack, get hip in a nice position, and just pre-activating rib cage and hip to move into a stack. And what I do here is I kind of squeeze that black roll together. I slightly push my heels into the bench, get my hip into a neutral position, and then I want to breathe those ribs down in order to get into a nice stacked position.
Perfect.
Okay, my job for today will be 3 sets of 5 on the squat, and it will be all about shifting from that pre-hingy squat, where I tend to arch my chest up a bit, and going over to a bit more forward lean and therefore avoiding that rib flare and staying into the stacked position, which will hopefully allow me to squat a bit deeper. And if you take a look at my older squat videos, you will see that due to that arched back, then I tend to need to lean more forward when I go down, and this crunches then my hip down and gives me a pretty bad position to push up from. And this is what I try to avoid, and therefore I will need to squat very slowly, very focused. So it's gonna be very exhausting, but let's see if we can make it. I think it was a pretty dope squatting session today. One of the most beautiful squats I ever did, if you ask me. Most of the reps pretty solid. Sometimes, of course, fell into my old squatting pattern. Probably needs a couple of weeks until I get used. What's pretty interesting is, due to my better position and that more forward lean, I get access to more pronation and the knee actually can travel a bit more forward, and I feel some fatigue here in my ankles from more knees over toes. Pretty strange feeling, but also feels kind of relieved and more mobile. So yeah, pretty good experience for me today. And let's hope we can keep that up. Next exercise are some toes elevated RDLs, where we'll focus also on leaning a bit more forward, front foot pressure, and then going down very slow and controlled, trying to keep the knees in so that I avoid that they are rotating outward. And we really go into that nice hip flexion. And when coming up, I focus on pushing my big toe into the floor and then extend my hip from that. Pretty nice exercise, feels really good, opens up the hip nicely, improved my hip hinge a lot. So if you have some problems with your hinge, it's definitely a very nice variation to try. Next on the list, we have 2 sets of muscle ups. We're going with 5 reps per set, just 5 kg, and just a bit of getting some repetitions into practice. We now have muscle ups 3 times a week, so sets now in the first block pretty low, getting used to the higher frequency, just to stay in the loop with that exercise. Nothing fancy. Last set for today. As we have no proper leg curl machine in here, we're trying to make the best with this ring leg curl setup. And basically, number of reps doesn't matter. We go until it burns. Foam roller, just to keep the upper leg stable so we don't shift out or in, just maintain it in position. What you will notice is that when the set is starting to get a bit heavier, that I tend to arch my back a bit more to leverage hamstrings, but I will work against that in order to stay as stacked as possible, which is very hard for me. And if you are interested in this nice shirt, the sleeves that you saw while squatting, and those nice shoes, you should keep an eye on the King of Weighted shop in the next upcoming weeks, because there will be a few releases coming.